Kakegurui is one of my all-time favorite anime, and truth be told, I genuinely cannot understand why. That's not to suggest it's an anime lacking in quality, nothing of the sorts, it's just that it's a very different type of anime than the ones I usually find myself enjoying the most. I adore large-scale stories with intimate, personal, and believable character moments. It's not much of a secret that I'm an enormous shonen head, and when you see my top 10, you can see that love for the genre in full, as it's almost entirely made up of battle shonens with only 3 exceptions. But even 2 of the exceptions fit some of the bills of what I desire from anime, particularly personal, intimate character writing and growth. Kakegurui doesn't have any of that. Its story isn't anything to write home about. In fact, it's often all over the place and disconnected. The characters are honestly the opposite of believable. They're highly exaggerated, down to their unbelievable facial expressions, cartoonish and over the top. Characters don't have grand motivations or sympathetic backstories. The story is pretty straightforward and plays a backseat role in favor of the gambling matches that make up the majority of the show. It's a strange, very oddly horny anime with quite a bit of lesbian energy going around. Just a bizarre show, and I can't imagine it appealing to that many people. And yet I absolutely love, honestly adore this anime. I've probably watched it the most out of anything in my top 10. Yumeko used to be my biggest anime crush when I was a teenager. First piece of anime merchandise I ever purchased was a poster of her. So, with that in mind, good lord Netflix, what are you doing? So recently Netflix released a trailer for a live-action Kakegurui adaptation. This is somehow not the first one, in fact it's not even the second, but it's the first non-Japanese one, being produced by Americans and made up of Brits, the setting even being moved to the United Kingdom as opposed to Japan to compensate. This is nothing new, a string in a long series of Netflix live-action adaptations going all the way back to 2017's live-action Death Note, with the years since seeing all sorts of Netflix adaptations from Fullmetal Alchemist to Cowboy Bebop to Bleach to Yu Yu Hakusho. Of course, I assume we're all well aware that the quality of these adaptations have been largely on the lower end, to put it mildly. From Death Note to Fullmetal Alchemist to Bebop, Netflix managing to butcher each and every single anime they get their hands on has been an enormous constant for quite some time. But I think this adaptation of Kakegurui, based on what we've seen so far, has been the most personal and the most frustrating for me. To me, this one trailer encapsulates every little thing I do not enjoy about these Netflix adaptations. I think when it comes to the American, and in general Western handling of these Japanese properties, there is a lack of understanding as to how they really operate, which translates into these low-quality adaptations entirely missing the mark. Don't get me wrong, the Japanese adaptations are no better, but they have their own list of problems. But I've noticed a consistent pattern of problems with these American live-action adaptations from Death Note all the way to the trailer for Kakegurui BET, and I really need to lay out why I'm so disappointed that Netflix keeps running into this wall over and over and over without realizing it. 6 months ago, I released a video about the critically acclaimed classic Neon Genesis Evangelion, detailing my 2 watch-throughs of the series I did between 2019 and 2024, and how I went from hating it the first go-around to loving it the second time I watched it. While I had a large number of complaints directed at the anime during my 2019 binge, one of my larger ones was based on a lack of understanding as to how stories can be presented. My adoration of battle shonens worked against me, as given I had only seen battle shonens up to that point, I was caught entirely off guard when Evangelion's story chose to present itself in a manner I was unfamiliar with. Many of the anime I had seen up to this point had started their story out by immediately dropping some sort of narrative goal, as doing so was a means to make sure audiences invest themselves in your narrative, giving a concrete reason as to why everything in the next number of episodes will happen, and dangling some sort of prize for sticking around to see where it goes at the end. This could be something as simple as we're going to defeat Zabuza, we need to save Rukia, we need to bring Yusuke back to life. So when Evangelion establishes that even though it is about fighting the angels, it's not the lifeblood of the narrative, as in it's not carrying the story on the same level as these other anime, I felt confused. I thought that was poor storytelling, not giving me a clear reason to invest myself in your story. It was only 5 years later I came to understand that mindset is incredibly naive. In truth, that is only one method to going about your stories like that. My experiences watching anime like Evangelion, Cowboy Bebop, and of course Kakegurui have had me getting drawn into stories that aren't really defining what they're trying to set up. Maybe there will be some posturing in the background for some sort of potential setup, but it will mostly play a backseat to the goings-ons of each episode. Stories that do this often rely on the characters in the world and the writing of that first episode to convince the audience that maybe they should come back for more in the near future. That shonen method is the expected and easy way to maintain audience investment, and don't get me wrong, it is a good reliable strategy for the most part, but you can just as easily strong-arm your audience into caring about what they are watching enough that they decide to see what comes next without having to go through those hoops. It's with that in mind that I return to the subject of Netflix's handling of these properties when they translate them into more Netflix-friendly live-action adaptations, particularly the American-produced ones. What I noticed while sitting through the trailer for Kakegurui BET, or just BET as it's going to be called, is that it appears they have given Yumeko a new narrative goal. Yumeko did in fact have a goal during the anime. In the first season, she hoped to land herself a one-on-one gambling match with the student council president Kirari Momobami, the only person in the school capable of matching her freak factor. And while that is an element at play, it's not quite the "let's find my dad" of the story. Many of the matchups in Kakegurui are self-contained in the sense that they don't get Yumeko any closer to reaching the president, but in BET, it appears that may not be her intention at the school. We don't know for sure. I do think it is possible that getting a match against the student council president may still be something she is after, but in the trailer there's a brief moment where Yumeko confides in someone that her parents had actually been students at Hyakao, or St. Dominic's, before both were killed, likely by someone at the school, and she intends to find whoever is responsible. Now, I have some issues with Yumeko being saddled with a motivation like this, but I'm going to save that discussion for later. For now, I need to focus on what I'm concerned the showrunners are attempting to do here. While there is no guarantee, as the show is currently not out, I have some reason to suspect that Yumeko was given this motivation so there would be a more concrete goal for Yumeko's journey, something more palpable for audiences to get invested in. The series may not be out quite yet, but the reason I'm so confident in this assessment is because it wouldn't be the first time Netflix has made alterations to an anime in this specific manner. Cowboy Bebop, the East Blue Saga of One Piece, and while not an anime, I feel it needs to be in this discussion as well, Book 1 of Avatar. What these three separate stories have in common is that, for the most part, the focus of their narratives is not on getting to some sort of end of arc or story goal. It's more interested in building its world, its characters, and gaining audience investment through these aspects of the story. However, when these stories were adapted into live action by Netflix, there was a clear shift. Each adaptation introduced a stronger, more defined narrative through line that wasn't originally there. In live-action Avatar, the decision was made to entirely rid of the episodic adventurous vibes of the animated version's first season, streamlining it, quote-unquote, to put heavier emphasis on the gang's journey to the North Pole. In the original East Blue Saga in One Piece, while there was a narrative through line as Luffy hoped to gather a crew and then head for the Grand Line, this definitely took a backseat in the face of the countless adventures he and his growing crew would end up getting into while in the East Blue. In Netflix One Piece, the showrunners added the Grand Line map as a new wrinkle in the plotline, as the fledgling Straw Hat crew gets a hold of one no thanks to Nami, and then have to play a game of keep away with every major pirate crew that went after them during the original East Blue Saga, except for Don Krieg, because each of them has some sort of stake in getting a hold of it. This is unlike the original anime, where they kinda just ran into all but the Arlong pirates. Netflix Bebop, while still keeping the episodic self-contained format of the anime, further details the affairs of the Syndicate, particularly Spike's former friend Vicious and former lover Julia, turning what was a background plotline that reared its head every now and then into a constant presence in the story. Are you starting to see the picture I'm trying to paint? This has been a consistent pattern with each new live-action adaptation from Netflix that has been produced for English-speaking audiences. And I get it. I truly understand the reason these producers feel the need to make decisions like this, as dangling some sort of narrative key in front of the audience is a much easier, much simpler way to almost universally guarantee your audience will be invested. And given every single one of these Netflix versions were released in one singular batch so audiences could binge the series, this choice is even more sensical. Mind you, the original versions of these shows aired weekly. While there was incentive to keep viewers invested in the long-term story, there wasn't as much pressure to get audiences hooked so immediately that they would check out the next episode after that without hesitation. While I do understand the motivation behind these adjustments to the original storytelling when turning them into shorter live-action retellings, I can't help but not be a huge fan that the showrunners feel the need to do this. To me, it shows a lack of confidence in the story you are trying to sell to the audience that you have to fundamentally alter their structure in such drastic ways. Keep in mind, these are adaptations of properties with enormous pre-existing fan bases who waded through the originals and for the most part had no issue with the way these stories were structured. East Blue and Book 1 may not be everyone's favorite segments of neither One Piece or Avatar, but did the alterations to the plot for Netflix's adaptations do them any favors? Not really. Live-action Avatar was lambasted for eliminating its more menial episodes, and Netflix One Piece's edition of the Grand Line Map was met with either complete apathy or lukewarm acceptance. Nobody thought this was a huge game changer or a huge improvement, just that it made sense. And the Syndicate plotline from Netflix Bebop, at least from what I hear, is just not good at all. I admit I didn't get far enough into Bebop to be able to form a definitive opinion, but from what I gathered, it's something to do with the characterization of Vicious and Julia, but you get the idea. I can recognize why these decisions were made, they make sense from a business perspective, yet to me, it still reeks of a lack of confidence in the strength of the original material, and a lack of trust in the audience's ability to appreciate storytelling that doesn't need to constantly dangle a carrot in front of them. In trying to make these stories easier to digest, Netflix often strips away the very soul that made them resonate in the first place. Take Avatar, for example. The reason so much of Book 1 is spent with Aang and his friends messing around on their way to the North Pole in the original is due in part to Aang as a character. He may be the Avatar, the person who is believed to be the only one capable of saving the world, but at the end of the day, he's a scared 12-year-old who can't help but run away from that responsibility because that's an enormous burden to place on a child. That's something that has to be contended with and confronted over the course of Book 1, and his character development from goofy, over-the-top kid to a much more serious teenager is something that really defines the original's narrative. But a Netflix live-action version, Aang is serious from the get-go, understands his responsibility, and very much wants to get to the North Pole as soon as possible. Like, that is fundamentally missing the point of the character, and I really can't get behind altering something like that. And truth be told, this, as in the writers changing the characters for the worse, that's all over Netflix's Avatar. Because some audiences may take offense to it, the live-action adaptation strips Sokka of his misogynistic attitudes he initially had in the original, even though growing out of those beliefs was a major part of his arc in Book 1. Katara, too, is watered down. Her stubbornness, abrasiveness, even her teen mom instincts are all softened, even though those traits are essential to who she is. She lost her mother at a young age, and so she had to step into that caretaker role far too early. And anytime we see that more abrasive, childish side of her, it's a reminder that despite everything, she is still a kid. What replaces her is a very uninteresting, less emotive character, and while I can understand why Sokka got changed, I absolutely cannot understand what good it did to strip Katara of her core components in favor of nothing at all. Recently, the actress who will play Team Avatar's fourth member, Toph, revealed that the Netflix version of the character will be slightly more feminine as opposed to the incredibly tomboyish version in the original. And while I have no idea how far Netflix is going to alter her character, just the fact that they are doing this all, especially after all the criticism they received for completely missing the point of many of the characters as was, is just so disappointing. Toph's personality is her rejecting her upbringing, having been a sheltered girl from a rich family where she was expected to be a normal, prim and proper, aristocratic child. I don't believe they're going to make Toph, like, completely feminine or anything, but even thinking that this needs to be changed just shows a real lack of understanding of the material on anything more than a surface level. Now, to be fair, I do understand to an extent why Netflix made these changes. They likely felt that modernizing these characters was necessary. Katara needed to be more of a girl boss, so they probably didn't want her leaning too hard into traditionally feminine traits like being nurturing or abrasive. They likely felt Sokka's early sexism would be too off-putting for modern audiences. And honestly, I get that concern to an extent, considering there's still a lot of debate within the Avatar fandom about whether or not it's even acceptable to like characters like Zuko or Iroh, who may have committed a couple war crimes. And with Toph, I imagine the writers assumed her rejecting traditional femininity was a flaw that needed fixing, since there's a common belief today that women rejecting femininity must be a sign of internalized issues. But here's the thing. These corrections weren't needed. These elements reflected realistic growth, realistic complexity, and by shaving down their edges, Netflix risks erasing the very things that made them so beloved in the first place. And this has proven to be a consistent pattern with each live-action anime adaptation made for Western audiences developed by Netflix. Netflix Bebop took Faye Valentine, a charming con artist who masked loneliness behind wit and a playful demeanor, and turned her into a louder, more brash and foul-mouthed character. And truth be told, if this was like an original character unrelated to the OG Faye, I wouldn't mind. Maybe she wouldn't be my favorite character, but I think she'd be a fine character. The problem is that she is supposed to be Faye, touched up because honestly, I don't even know. I read in the LA Times it was to give her more agency, but the original Faye already had plenty of agency as was. It feels less like they updated Faye and more like they replaced her with a completely different character under the same name. So consistently does Netflix try to update these characters for modern audiences, and in the process they entirely miss the point of what these characters stood for, and just as consistently make them worse off. But it's not even just how Netflix handles the characters, though this has proven to be a consistent issue, but the very essence, the very soul of the properties they adapt, seems to be completely misunderstood when bringing the shows into live action. Take Death Note. What made the original such a beloved icon of the 2000s anime lineup was its mixture of supernatural horror and detective thriller. The cat and mouse game between two super geniuses fighting over their own senses of justice, their beliefs, and the various ways they try to corner each other. The thematic depth of the story and the questions it raises about mortality, justice, and whether L or Light were in the right during their conflict. Netflix Note does have the cat and mouse, supernatural horror, and detective thriller elements of the narrative, but instead of two super geniuses fighting over a battle of ideology, you get a much more stripped down narrative without the thematic depth. Without the battle of the ideologies, or even the super genius element of the show, as Light is a more emotional, more relatable, quote-unquote, teen, while L is a less intelligent, more emotional adult, with a larger emphasis on the romance between Light and Misa, now Mia, as well as the horror of the Death Note, with the death scenes having much more focus than they did in the original. What you get is a very different Death Note, a distinction that I'd like to believe is intentional, an attempt to make a Death Note adaptation that wasn't necessarily trying to just redo the original story, but it strays too far from the original by ridding itself or downplaying all the core elements that made the original anime so beloved in the first place. And then you have Netflix Bebop. Netflix Bebop at least tries to be much more faithful to the original series, keeping the characters in world intact, but it completely misses the mark on the tone of the original. The original was this melancholic, stylish, slow-burn story with some dry humor to spice things up. Netflix Bebop, while imitating many surface-level elements, struggles to capture that same atmosphere. It often feels louder, more over-the-top, and exaggerated than the anime. It even has the oft-repeated character accidentally grabs breast of nearest woman, even though the original anime did not do that, really showcasing the dissimilarity of each version's tones. Netflix Bebop's humor is less dry, more stock MCU, with its characters being way more exaggerated, hardly even taking the concept of the show seriously. In an adaptation of the episode where the characters deal with eco-terrorists, the news reporter who is breaking the story actually laughs at the absurdity of the situation, almost as if the writer saw the series as fundamentally silly and not worth taking seriously. And this is perfectly reflected in the direction, which portrays Bebop in this over-the-top cartoonish manner that doesn't at all represent the neo-noir spacey grit of the original. The only adaptation worth anything at all was Netflix's take on One Piece, which despite having some issues, even sharing many of the same issues as all these other ones, still comes out relatively unscathed, which I feel is due to its showrunner being an actual One Piece fan while also having the supervision of Eiichiro Oda, the original mangaka himself. Honestly, my biggest issue was just the fact that it's hard to make a story that was built for comics and animation work nearly as well in live action without it feeling very off-putting. It is all of this that is why I got one good look at the trailer for BET and sighed. I'm going to be 100%. I don't look at these Netflix adaptations and hope they fail. Going all the way back to when they first showed off Netflix Note, back when I was still in junior high, I had hope that it would turn out to be a worthwhile experience, and I kept that attitude up for each and every new adaptation up until this one, because by all accounts, it is painfully obvious that this one stands a 95% chance of falling right back into the very same traps that have hurt every single live-action adaptation not named One Piece. Even putting aside my complaints about the likelihood that the structure of the show will be changed because Netflix believes the original structure just won't cut it, I'm already seeing alterations being made that really fly in the face of what made Kakegurui so enjoyable in the first place. I said earlier in this video that Yumeko Jabami was one of my biggest anime crushes when I was a teenager, and that wasn't for no reason. Yumeko is the lifeblood, the essence of what makes Kakegurui. There's a spin-off prequel anime released a couple years back that focuses on one of Yumeko's allies, Mary Saotome, and as fun as I felt it was, without Yumeko's presence, it felt a little empty. Yumeko is the perfect vehicle for this narrative, a true chaotic neutral, an enigma who wears the skin of a prim-proper girl who presents herself as polite, poised, and endlessly cheerful, who just as easily, with that same smile, destroys her peers' livelihoods, not for any other reason other than that she enjoys gambling. Her smile slowly but surely distorts into something more creepy as she continues these matchups, revealing just how utterly twisted she is when gambling is involved. She's more than willing to play against people who cheat, which is pretty much everyone, because not only does she think it makes the matches more fun, but she will inevitably find the method of cheating and win in spite of it due to her unspoken but extreme intellect. She isn't given inner monologues like other characters, we're just left to try to guess what is going through that head of hers. It is for this reason that she is incredibly unpredictable and, to an extent, a little scary. You might assume that because Midori is by far the most insane gambling-loving member of the student council that Yumeko would be a big fan of hers, only for their gambling match to reveal just how different they are and how much the normally straight-faced Yumeko absolutely detests her, her face twisting with this absolute disgust at what she sees as Midori's degradation of the gambling she loves. Yumeko is a very particular character, and messing with that in any way could completely topple this house of cards into something completely and entirely unrecognizable. Now, for the most part, it seems that these are things that it appears BET is being decently faithful to. She loves gambling, and she doesn't seem too concerned about the risks. But remember how I mentioned way earlier in this video that Yumeko was saddled with motivation to find those responsible for killing her parents? This is just weird. This isn't entirely out of character for who she is, but it's how in the trailer it appears her parents' loss is something that seems to genuinely tear her up. Her explanation of her background is immediately followed with her frustratingly practicing martial arts, which actually, why does Yumeko know martial arts? Because she doesn't know martial arts in the original. I'm concerned there's like a non-0% chance they gave her this trait because she's like the only East Asian character in the show, and maybe they thought, oh, you know, so let's show she's Asian. She does martial arts because Asian people do martial arts. I don't know. I guess they want to have some action scenes in this version of the show. I don't know why, but sure. But getting back to my point, the fact that Yumeko is distraught about her parents' death, so much so that it's implied she may try to kill those responsible, is what's out of character here. Yumeko is often incredibly detached from reality. In Season 2, she was questioned as to whether or not she cared about the people she crushed, livelihoods destroyed, and she admitted she felt regret, but only at the fact that she had no remorse for them, something she says with a smile on her face. Yumeko actually lost a family member to gambling. Her older sister is hospitalized in a ward because of this. And yet, Yumeko does not seem to care at all. Even when she visits, it's noted that Yumeko seems to have no compassion or sadness in her eyes. I'd like to imagine if Yumeko was after whoever killed her parents, it'd be because she'd want to gamble with them, because the prospect of matching against someone who did her parents in would be super fun to her. It wouldn't be because she'd want to kill them. And look, this is an adaptation. Fine, things are going to be changed, but this decision is definitely going to take away an aspect of Kakegurui that made it so good in the first place. Yumeko's bizarre, Stepford smile even in the face of all the cheating, or the other terrible things that happen in the school, making her a more sympathetic hero, is certainly playing with fire. I really hope the extent of changes to Yumeko end there, because anything else to try to make her more sympathetic or relatable will be taking her in a direction that isn't built for her. Also, I am not a fan of the way the characters look. Each Netflix adaptation has gotten progressively better at translating the designs of the anime into live action, so this is just a huge step back. The Student Council wasn't exactly the most menacing group of anime antagonists out there, but the Netflix version makes them all look like a bunch of goobers. Take Ririka. In the original, she wears this big theatrical mask that covers her whole face. It makes it impossible to grasp what she is thinking behind that mask. It's what makes the reveal that behind that mask is a very shy and socially awkward girl very surprising. Yet the Netflix version gives her a more basic disease prevention mask, which does not give off that same effect. BET's Student Council feels like a group of generic TV show high school bullies, not the concerning, larger-than-life figures they were in the original. It's very clear that the Netflix team wants to retain and capture the lighter and often sillier elements of Kakegurui, which admittedly can't be an easy task. A lot of that type of stuff would be difficult to translate to live action from animation. This is why I believe a lot of the Japanese live action Netflix adaptations don't work, because they tried way too hard to retain all of the elements of the anime stylizations without accepting that it's a different medium which requires a different approach. And while BET's style seems to have correctly assessed that it can't just steal the original style and expect it to look nearly as good, I do worry it might come off as a little too silly in its presentation of the story. I mentioned this briefly before, but I'll mention it again. The setting has been shifted from Japan to the United Kingdom, which, fine, if you're going to make an English-speaking version of a show that's Japanese, altering the setting to one where people would actually be speaking English kinda makes sense, and I don't see it as too big a deal personally. I do know that a lot of people are a little upset that certain characters have been race-swapped, like Mary and seemingly Ryota, but I mean, so has the entire cast, with the sole exception of Yumeko, who Netflix smartly kept as Japanese. But I'm getting off topic. To get to my ultimate point of this video, it's just that I don't go into these live-action adaptations hoping that they are terrible. I see the cast, I see the crew, and I see a group of passionate people who want to craft really good television. I don't like to see them fail over and over and over. But no matter how I feel, they just do. It's because I don't feel like the people responsible really try to fully understand what they are doing and how to bring it over into live action without creating some sort of abomination that distorts the very stories they are based on. If Netflix is going to keep going down this route, I feel they need to take these projects much more seriously. I know most people hate live action adaptations on principle, and while I do personally see producing them as a fool's errand, I do at least understand that they could be a good gateway for audiences who may not otherwise be interested in anime, a good way to expand the profile. At my old job, I remember talking with a coworker who had to have been in her 40s or 50s, telling me how much she loved that goofy little pirate show on Netflix that had recently been released, and was surprised to learn it was based on an anime. I do think there's some value in these live-action adaptations, but if Netflix is going to pour so much money into them, then they need to recognize that value too. And that starts with genuinely understanding and respecting the anime they are adapting. Because without that understanding, no amount of money, talent, or good intentions will ever be enough to capture what made these stories special in the first place.